Picture this: a forgotten Caribbean port drowning in fog. Shadows slip between broken ships and rotting docks. And at the heart of it all, the ghost of Blackbeard himself, walking these cursed streets, searching for the boy who betrayed him. This isn't just another pirate story. This is a confession, a secret torn from the pages of a diary that was never meant to be found. A boy who rose from the gutters, earned the trust of the most feared captain on the sea, and vanished in the most brutal way imaginable, leaving behind a message written in dried blood. If tales of betrayal, loss, and cursed loyalty awaken something in you, legends aren't just told, they're passed from sailor to sailor. If you crave the untold tales of the sea, loyalty, loss, and vengeance, subscribe to the channel and claim your place in our crew. The news reached us just as the last light sank behind the waves. Blackbeard stood at the bow, silent, like a statue carved from shadow and salt. His gaze fixed on the distant shoreline, as if he could already smell the blood waiting for him there. No words, no curses, just a slow, deliberate lift of his hand, pointing toward the coast. We all knew what that meant. No discussion, no vote, no rum to soften the blow. The crew moved like men walking to their own graves because we understood. This wasn't just another fight. This was something personal. The name carved into our fear that night was Ezekiel Varela, a ghost dressed in flesh and bone, a man whose cruelty was spoken about in low voices across every port from Tortuga to Port Royal. Once a slave trafficker, then a mercenary, now a dog on a leash for the East India Company. But even the company kept him at arm's length. Varela didn't just kill, he broke people. Slow, methodical, like peeling a man's soul layer by layer until nothing human remained. His fortress stood on the far side of the island, a jagged scar of stone called the Devil's Hold. Some said it was built on the ruins of an old Spanish mission. Others whispered it was cursed long before the first stone was laid. Either way, men who entered rarely came back. The air on deck grew thick, like we were already breathing the dust of our own graves. Blackbeard didn't call for a council, didn't gather us by the mast to speak of plans or promises. He just turned, eyes burning like dying coals, and said, "We sail at first light." That night, nobody slept. Some sharpened blades until their fingers bled. Others sat in silence, staring at the horizon, wondering if this would be the day their names vanished with the tide. I caught Jonas praying in the corner, hands trembling, voice cracked and low, asking whatever God was still listening to forgive what we were about to do. I didn't pray. What's the point when you've already sold your soul to the sea? As the first streaks of grey bruised the sky, we pulled anchor. The ship moved like a beast unleashed, hungry, angry, dragging all of us toward something we couldn't escape. The closer we got to the Devil's Hold, the quieter we became. The fort rose out of the rocks like a wound that wouldn't close, black banners fluttering, cannon muzzles pointed like accusing fingers at the sea. And somewhere inside those walls, Varela waited, smiling, no doubt, waiting for Blackbeard to come knocking, like he wanted this as much as we feared it. I remember standing at the rail, watching the shoreline crawl closer, and hearing Blackbeard's voice behind me. Low, heavy, like gravel dragged across iron. "There's only one way this ends," he said, and we believed him. We didn't know if we'd return, but we knew, one way or another, that by sundown, the sand on that beach would taste like iron. For 3 endless days, Blackbeard spoke to no one. He locked himself inside his cabin, surrounded by torn maps, stained charts, and half-burnt letters. From outside, we could hear the scrape of compass legs on wood, the slow, restless pacing of boots across the floor. And Sometimes the low creak of the ship itself, as if even the Queen Anne's Revenge felt the weight of what was coming. The crew grew restless. Whispers spread like infection. Some said the captain had finally cracked, swallowed whole by grief over the boy they'd found hanging in the square. Others believed it was guilt, that Blackbeard feared this was all punishment for sins too old to count. No one dared speak those thoughts out loud, not where the boards could hear, not where his shadow might be. Listening, only one man had the guts to knock on that door. Israel Hands, Blackbeard's right hand, his blade in the dark, the only soul brave or foolish enough to challenge him when the air turned heavy like this. I stood near the stairs, close enough to hear but far enough to pretend I wasn't listening. Hands pushed open the door without waiting for an answer. "Captain." His voice was low but sharp, like the edge of a knife left too long in salt water. "Are we moving? Or are we letting that dog spit on our flag?" For a moment, nothing, just silence, thick and sour like spoiled rum. Then, the sound of wood scraping as Blackbeard lifted his head. When he spoke, it wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. His voice came out dry, like stone grinding against stone, eyes burning like coals that refused to die. "We're moving, Hands." A pause, but this time, no powder, no fire. Another pause, longer, heavier, as if even the air held its breath. Only salt. That night, the sky tore itself. Open, rain fell like broken glass, cold, sharp, each drop slicing through skin and cloth as if the heavens wanted to bleed us before we even reached the shore. No one spoke. We moved like shadows, slipping from the ship into small boats, rowing toward the swamp that curled around Varella's fortress like a dying serpent. The water stank of rot and old death, thick with the ghosts of men who had tried this path before and failed. But Blackbeard, he had a different plan. This wasn't a siege. It wasn't a raid. It was a ritual. He had studied every crack in those stone walls, every forgotten footpath through the mangroves, every weakness that pride and arrogance had carved into Varella's defenses. And tonight, we would walk straight into the lion's mouth, but not with gunpowder, not with cannon fire. We carried something else. On our backs, inside torn canvas sacks, each man bore the weight of salt, heavy, coarse, pulled from the mines of Tortuga, enough to poison the earth, to wither whatever life dared grow within those cursed walls. The older sailors muttered the words under their breath, voices low, cracked by fear and belief. Salt to purify, salt to condemn. Step by step, we sank deeper into the marsh, mud clawing at our boots, unseen things shifting beneath the surface, but no one stopped. Somewhere ahead, Blackbeard led the way, a dark figure moving through the rain as if the storm itself was bending to his will. This was no longer about gold or revenge. This was about sending a message. And by dawn, every stone in the Devil's Hold would remember what it meant to fear the sea. When the signal came, it was like tearing open the belly of a storm. Blackbeard moved first, silent as a shadow, fast as the strike of a viper. The men followed, blades drawn, eyes hollow, breathing in nothing but smoke and adrenaline. The barracks went up in flames before the first alarm bell rang. Doors were barricaded, escape routes sealed with overturned carts and burning timber. The guards who fought back didn't last long. Their screams bled into the night, swallowed by the crackle of fire and the roar of Blackbeard's crew. The courtyard, once a place where men laughed, drank, and counted stolen coin, became a choking field of ash and ruin. Smoke coiled up the stone walls like black serpents, turning the air thick, making it hard to tell if you were breathing or drowning. We pushed through, room by room, floor by floor, until only one chamber remained, untouched. At the heart of the fortress, surrounded by velvet curtains, broken bottles, and women too terrified to move, sat Varela, drunk, half-naked, laughing like a madman. He clutched a jug of rum with one hand, and with the other waved a pistol around as if it meant something. He thought he was safe, thought the weight of his hired guns would shield him, thought that Blackbeard would never come this far, never cross this final line. But as we dragged him to the courtyard, chains biting deep into his wrists, face smeared with blood and dirt, something shifted in the air. The men fell silent. Even the rain seemed to pause, waiting for what came next. Blackbeard stood over him, eyes dark, voice low, cold enough to make every man on deck forget how to breathe. "I don't want your gold, Varela." A step closer. "Just your tongue." Another step. "And your gut." And in that moment, we all understood. This wasn't justice. It was something far older and far more dangerous. In the center of the courtyard, where the ash still hung in the air and the stones were slick with rain and soot, Blackbeard ordered them to drag out an old oak table, the same table where Varela had once feasted, where he laughed with his officers, drank until dawn, and toasted to the suffering of men he'd chained, beaten, and left to rot. Tonight, that table had a different purpose. At its center, Blackbeard placed a block of salt, not a handful, not a sack, a solid slab, rough, jagged, heavy as a human skull, dragged all the way from the docks, glistening like bone under the firelight. Blackbeard stood beside it, slow, deliberate, pulling a knife from his belt, the blade, long, dull at the edges, but freshly sharpened at the tip. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, his voice low, almost casual, like a teacher showing a lesson to a disobedient child. Varela, blood dripping from his split lips, tried to grin, tried to speak, but the words came out twisted, broken, like the man himself. He never finished the sentence. Blackbeard stepped forward, and with a nod, two men grabbed Varela by the hair and forced his head back. The first handful of salt, wet with rancid rum, was shoved between his cracked teeth. No time to spit, no time to breathe. The mixture burned its way down his throat like ground glass. He gagged, choked, spat, but Blackbeard didn't stop. Another handful, then another, and another. Each swallow scraped away at him, turning his coughs into screams, his laughter into wet gasps, until even the most hardened sailors on deck began to turn their eyes away, hands trembling, jaws clenched. Some covered their mouths, others simply stared, pale as bone, as if tasting the salt themselves. But Blackbeard, he just stood there, silent, patient, watching every bite, every gasp, every tear, as if this was the only language the Devil's Hold would ever understand. The salt burned him from the inside, like liquid fire crawling through his throat, down to his gut, leaving raw wounds where flesh should be. It didn't take long before Varela's bravado shattered, the laughter stopped, the curses dried on his tongue, and soon all that remained was a hoarse, broken whisper. "Water, please. Just water." Blackbeard stood a few paces away, the glow of his pipe casting soft amber light across his face, making him look less like a man and more like something older, colder, carved out of smoke and regret. He watched, unmoving, letting the silence between them grow, heavy, unbearable, until finally he spoke. "My boy asked for water too." A pause. "When you tore his tongue out." The words hung in the air, sharp, final, like the crack of a pistol before dawn. Varela's eyes widened, but there was no room left for pride now, only fear. The torture didn't stop. Every time Varela tried to spit, rough hands forced his jaw open, pressing blades between his teeth until blood mixed with the salt. When he collapsed, When his body went limp and useless, they dragged him back to consciousness with more of the same, pouring salt water and boiling rum down his throat until he screamed himself awake. The night stretched on, slow and merciless, as if the stars themselves had turned their backs. Around the courtyard, the men stood in silence, some with fists clenched, others with eyes lowered, none brave enough to question what was unfolding before them. It wasn't just punishment, it was something deeper, a reckoning. And by the time the first light touched the edges of the fortress, we all knew Varella's suffering had only just begun. By midnight, the courtyard had fallen into a strange, uneasy stillness. The rain had stopped, but the air remained thick, heavy with smoke, sweat, and the sour stench of fear. Varela lay slumped against the oak table and barely breathing, his face bloated, his skin pale and cracked like sun-dried leather. Somewhere near the edge of the firelight, young Matteo stood frozen. He was barely more than a boy, same age as Tomas had. A bean. They had shared stolen meals below deck, whispered secrets during long nights at sea, dreams of gold and adventure, before Tomas was taken from us in the cruelest way imaginable. Now, with Varela gasping like a gutted fish, Matteo couldn't stand it anymore. Without waiting for permission, he dropped to his knees before Blackbeard, eyes burning, voice shaking like a man drowning on dry land. "Captain, please, let him die. This is too much, even for us." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Some men stared at the ground, their boots suddenly more interesting than the scene before them. Others kept their eyes fixed on the horizon, as if hoping the dark waves might swallow them whole and spare them from witnessing more. Blackbeard, slow as the turning tide, stepped toward Matteo. He didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for his pistol or his blade. He simply looked down at the boy, studying him, letting the silence between them stretch like a taut rope ready to snap. Then, with a voice low and steady, he turned to Varela. "You hear that?" he said, dragging each word like an anchor through sand. "Even the youngest among us has more mercy in his bones than you ever had in your wretched life." Varela, eyes swollen shut, barely conscious, gave no answer. And with that, Blackbeard walked away, leaving both Matteo and Varela to understand exactly how deep the captain's wrath could go. At first light, when the sun dared to climb over the broken walls of the Devil's Hold, its rays revealed a courtyard no man would soon forget. Blood, vomit, salt scattered like snowfall over stone. The ground looked poisoned, stained with the echoes of a night that felt more like a curse than a victory. Blackbeard stood at the edge of it all, pipe cold in his hand, eyes hollow, as if some part of him had drifted far beyond the walls, far beyond the sea. Without a word, he gave the signal. Two men dragged Varela's limp, half-conscious body back to the table. There was no ceremony, no speech, no final insult, just one more handful of salt, coarse, white, heavy, shoved deep into what little remained of his throat. Varela's body spasmed once, twice, then fell still. Nobody moved, no cheers, no sighs of relief. Even the hardest among us, the ones who had slit a dozen throats without blinking, kept their gaze low, hands trembling at their sides. A thin, shaking voice broke the silence. It came from Elias, the old ship's surgeon, a man who had seen more death than any of us, but whose hands quivered now like dried leaves in the wind. "He's gone, Captain." His words drifted out, soft, almost apologetic, as if fearing that even death might not be enough to end this. Blackbeard didn't flinch, didn't speak, just gave a slow, small nod, barely more than a breath. But when I looked into his eyes, I swear, what I saw there wasn't triumph or peace. It was emptiness, as if, with every grain of salt we forced down Varella's throat, something inside Blackbeard had died too. At dawn, when the sea breeze finally stirred the smoke and the last echoes of screams faded into the mangroves, Varella's body remained where we left it, still tied to that cursed oak table, mouth frozen in one final grotesque gasp, packed tight with hardened salt, a grotesque monument to everything that had happened here. The blood had dried in thin, cracked rivers across the courtyard stones. The air smelled of burnt wood, wet earth, and something else none of us cared to name. The freed slaves, wide-eyed and silent, vanished into the swamp, slipping through the roots and shadows like ghosts desperate for distance. They didn't wait for thanks. They didn't look back. Just like us. They knew some places are better left behind. By the time the merchants and company men on the island heard what we had done, it was too late for them to react. No soldiers came, no ships gave chase, no letters of warning were sent across the Caribbean. Instead, they did the only thing cowards and politicians know how to do when they smell the edge of something too dark to face. They whispered, and those whispers spread like fire in dry grass. In every port from Havana to Barbados, the story twisted itself into a warning. A new phrase appeared on the lips of sailors, in the back rooms of taverns, scribbled into the corners of ship logs. Mind your steps, or you'll end up like Varela, with the cursed salt of Puerto Sombra in your gut. Men laughed when they said it, but never for long. Because behind every joke, there was that silence, that cold, sinking silence that came whenever someone spoke Blackbeard's name. And as for him, that night, back aboard the Queen Anne's Revenge, with the crew quiet and the sea stretching out black and endless before us, Blackbeard sat alone by the lantern light, staring at the empty page of the ship's log. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, with a hand that barely trembled, he picked up his quill and wrote just one line. I promised justice, and I kept it. Nothing more. No speeches, no confessions, no names, just that. And still, when I close my eyes at night, I can see the way he stared at that page, like a man writing something heavier than truth, heavier than guilt, heavier than anything the sea could wash away. We sailed from that place at first light. No one spoke of it again. But some memories, no matter how deep you bury them, have a way of clawing back through the wood and salt. Now I wonder, did you already know this forgotten part of the story? And if you had stood on that deck, watching it all unfold, what would you have done? What other sea stories, half-whispered and lost, deserve to be told here? If this story touched you in any way, don't let it vanish like so many other names the sea has taken. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep hearing what was never meant to be forgotten.